You are, I promise.
Thank you.
Just think about it. You're talking to us.
You know, it's the thing about being a therapist I've realized recently is that I talking to one person, right, is nothing anymore. But then when you start thinking about an audience of 90, 100 plus, it's like, oh my God.
So people are gathering.
Berta, did you hit record?
I did.
Okay, stop for a minute because I don't.
Okay, now we're gonna record. Okay, so we'll wait until like 1:05 and officially start with introductions. So we'll wait till everybody gets in the room and we'll move on. I know we had a pretty high number of pre-registrations, so we'll see who we pick up on Facebook as well. I'm gonna switch my screen for a moment so I can get my Facebook stuff going. Just a moment. Hey Candace, I'm in the middle of a webinar. You want to talk to my mom? Hey, I gotta go on a webinar. I love you. I will watch you back to your mom. 3 more minutes. Welcome to all those that are coming in the room. We're going to start in a few minutes. We're going to give some more people to log on. We're also on Facebook Live, and we will be recording this as well. So anyone that you know that missed this, or if you want to go back to it, you'll be able to do that. It'll be posted on the district website, Kirkwood School District website, under the Equity tab, under Kirkwood Educational Speaker Series tab. And then, of course, on Facebook, it's there forever. So we're going to start in just a few minutes.
Excuse me.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. I'm excited to bring to you for this third speaker series, Jeanna Knight. And Jeanna Knight has communicated with our Kirkwood Teachers of Color group before, had some really good information that I think will help all of us in our mental health and wellness. And so for today, Getting a little feedback, so let me move my. Sorry about that. I was getting some feedback. So, Jeanna Knight is a physical therapist, not a physical therapist, but a therapist, and she's going to be talking to us today about wellness and trauma and things that are going on right now. I want to do this statement first, and my statement, I just lost my statement. I had it come up in a minute. There it is. Okay, I just misplaced my statement, so I'm going to have Shonda go on, and when you come it back to me, you can, I'll read the statement for us. So Dr. Shonda Ambers Phillips, Director of Student Services, will now talk to you about things that are going on in the district. Thank you.
Yes, so my name is Dr. Shonda Ambers Phillips, and I'm the Executive Director of Student Services in Kirkwood School District, as Roberta said. And one of the things that I do is I facilitate a group called the Educational Equity Task Force, and 7 objectives or overarching themes basically outline the work of this group. One of the things that we look at is just learning from others. And so as a part of this learning from others in our journey, we have the Kirkwood Educational Equity Speaker Series, where we all have an opportunity to learn from educators and experts in various fields. We also want to make sure that we're exhibiting shared leadership that is courageous, collaborative, and also transformative. And so we are thinking outside of the box and trying to find ways to engage not only our students and families, but to do this work at a higher level. The final thing I will say is we want to make sure that we are engaged in our community to build shared ownership and responsibility for success of all of our students. And so we know we can't do this work in isolation. We know that this not only encompasses the work of the school district, but our students, parents, families, community alike, and that we are just committed to the students in our district and to educational equity. And so we thank you so much for joining us today. And I guess I'll pitch it back to Roberta to read our overall mission for this.
We can't hear you.
All right, I'm gonna have to get back to my statement because the mission statement has disappeared from in front of me. So I'm gonna move on because I don't wanna waste any more time, and I know folks are here. So I'll make sure I double back with that. I do wanna make a couple of announcements for any of our Kirkwood staff that have participated in any of the series. Please contact me or Lorna Dick. Contact her so she can put this information in MLP. So if you've been participating in any of the series or any of the book studies, please email Lorna Dick at the central office and she can help you with that. So I'm going to turn it now over to Jeanna Knight, who's we're excited to hear how she's going to give us coping strategies that we need for all the trauma things that are going on right now.
Yeah.
Jeanna?
Thank you. So just to give everyone a little bit of a background in terms of who I am, my name is Jeanna Knight. I am a therapist here in St. Louis, licensed here in Missouri as well as Illinois as a licensed professional counselor. I also have training, and my background education is actually in marriage and family therapy. I'm currently completing a doctorate degree at St. Louis University in medical family therapy. And so it allows me and affords me an opportunity to use those skills and things that I've learned through marriage and family therapy and apply them to help families who are exploring and trying to work through grief and illnesses and a variety of medical concerns that come up for families and for individuals and families. And so with that, I am really just delighted today to be able to talk to you about some coping strategies that we really need to keep at the forefront of our minds in terms of helping each other and helping our students, helping our kiddos as we are really trying to work through all of that's going on in our society right now. As I'm sure everyone has been looking at the news and discussing with families and friends, we all know that the last 5 months have been very traumatic, have really frozen the way that we have done life. And we're all trying to figure out how to not only push through it, but survive. And so because of that, it's not something that we have known how to handle. It's not something that we've studied how to handle or how to cope with. And so we're all trying to figure it out. My work as a therapist in the community gives me the opportunity to really just help people where they are. And I'm very humbled and thankful to be in the position to support families and individuals. And even before I really get started with what I want to share today, I really want to encourage all of you that if you feel as though you are having a difficult time pushing through all that's happening within our world right now, and you feel like you need additional support, there are counselors here to help you. There are counselors here to meet you where you are and support you so that you can get that additional support that you may need to get through these trying times. Okay, so my plan for today is to only speak to you for probably 15 to 20 minutes. I want to give a little bit of background in terms of historical trauma, but I really want to make sure that I save time for questions and allow people to ask anything that sort of comes up for them, even if they're looking for resources. I want to do the best that I can today to ensure that you guys have some ideas for how we're going to, again, help each other and help our kids as they are soon coming back to school or going to have virtual classes. So my own personal research is really around historical trauma and how historical trauma has affected maternal health for African American women. And in this work, it has, number one, giving me the opportunity to just sort of dive into my own experiences as a Black mom and as a daughter, granddaughter, et cetera, and look at how trauma has gone through generations in my own family, as well as how it has impacted other people that I serve, other people that I know, other people that I work with. And the reality is that here lately, historical trauma has become more common language. We're talking about it a lot more, even though there's still a lot that we don't know about how it actually impacts our bodies. But it does impact our bodies. And it doesn't just impact the Black body, it also impacts white bodies and Hispanic bodies and those who come from countries that have been savagely overtaken by others. And so historical trauma is something that we are just now really starting to dive into and get a better understanding of. But what's important and what I want others to know is that when we see things on television, i.e. George Floyd's death, George Floyd's murder, it impacts how we are working in our lives, how we understand who we are as a people, not just Black people, but also white people. And some of that is because of what is stored in our bodies, even before we see these images on television. So Yehuda and et al. Has done several studies, and it was primarily looking at how Holocaust survivors and generations thereafter have produced cortisol in their bodies. And cortisol is that calming hormone that we produce that helps us to really sort of go, okay, I'm safe, I'm okay, everything is all right. And what they found is that generations after those who suffered in the Holocaust actually do not produce cortisol in the same manner. So what does that mean for us? That means that when we have generations of trauma, and now studies are saying that the effects of trauma through epigenetics goes back 14 generations, which you can only imagine that your body is responsible, is bearing the cost of everything that your ancestors 14 generations back endured. So not only here for me in the Americas, but even things that my ancestors endured in Africa is just amazing to me. But what we're finding out is that the cortisol in my body is not producing in the same way that it did for my grandmother per se. That, I am a little bit more keenly aware of what's happening around me and perhaps not even able to calm down in the same manner because through generations, my cortisol and my hormones have been impacted because of that historical trauma. So this is, again, still fairly new research, but it's good work because it helps us to better understand why it is that, you know, we sometimes have these feelings that we can't explain. And oftentimes we focus on the fact that learned behaviors have impacted how kids and how then adults come to understand other people and understand relationships. But there's also another piece here, and that is that there's something happening in our bodies that is responding to our environment because of the trauma that our ancestors and that those before us have endured. I just want to just sort of put out a word about an author, Professor Resmaa Menakem. His name is spelled R-E-S-M-A-A. Last name is M-E-N-A-K-E-N. And he has a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and it is phenomenal. And he has, there's a podcast that I recently heard that he was on, and it just really moved me because he talks very keenly about how we have to understand what's happening in our bodies in order to really move forward in this conversation about race and culture. And so I just want to put a plug out there to him. I know that we're all sort of trying to dive into books and literature and find out more about anti-racism and how we can support the cause and be allies, etc. Robert Patterson defined anti-racism as an active and conscious effort to work against multidimensional aspects of racism. I just want to read that one more time. Anti-racism is an active and conscious effort to work against multidimensional aspects of racism. And here lately, we've been having a lot of conversation about how we change our perceptions and how we look at ourselves and how we think about how we are interacting with people of other ethnicities and how we approach culture in America specifically. But there's another piece again, and that is the fact that our bodies are also responding to what we're seeing. Our bodies are also responding to that person who I'm not sure if they really are open to having a conversation about race. I'm not really sure if they're open to the possibility that we may disagree on how things really are here in America. And so there's a certain amount of tension that we're also holding that comes with the conversations that we're having about anti-racism. And in as much as we're focusing on how to make social change, we also need to be keenly aware of the fact that there are some things that our bodies are experiencing that we may not be able to voice. My own personal perception is that because there's so much that's happening in our world right now that we, again, have not been able to prepare for, that we may not see the effects thereof until years later, you know. And this is, you know, the pandemic. This is anti-racism and what's happening now in our society, and that people are becoming more keenly aware of social injustices. The way that trauma works is that usually the effects come up later. And so I think it's something that we all just sort of need to be mindful of, that our bodies are being impacted in this present moment. And some of what our bodies are experiencing and encountering right now, we may not really feel, albeit even understand for some time to come, okay? I think it's something that... Okay, I'm sorry, that was feedback. I thought somebody had asked a question. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about chronic stress. When we think about how trauma impacts the body, historical trauma, we need to think about chronic stress, that this stress on our bodies is impacting not only our organs and the function of our organs, but also our minds, right? Mental health wise, right now, we see a huge increase in anxiety. We see an increase in depression, and we've seen an increase in suicides, okay? All of which have really just come about in the last 4 months. And not to say that those things did not exist. One of my things that I'm really trying to focus on in my practice with many of my clients is, how do we find the coping skills today before we get to the months where it's colder outside, the sun is not out as long, people tend to feel the blues of the season. We do now to start preparing for those upcoming months, so that we have some things under our belts to really help us get through what will be an additional impact in terms of our mental health and our physical health, okay? So chronic stress, repeated responses to stress, lead to increased anxiety, increased depression, insomnia, gastrointestinal issues, heart disease. And in our kids right now, a lot of them may not be able to really express some of what they feel. For adults to have more conversations with them, to talk to them, what is happening not only on a social impact or at a social level, but also what's happening in their bodies. What are they feeling that they may or may not be expressing? Now, let me say, the teenagers that are sleeping for 12 plus hours may not be depressed, but in fact, that may just sort of be okay for them. However, if you have a kid having difficulty sleeping, that's something that we definitely want to look at and talk to them about. Not only do we need to be mindful of that sort of behavior with our kids, we need to be mindful of that behavior within ourselves. So if we're noticing that there are some things that are happening with us that have not been on par, it's not our usual sort of behavior, we really need to look at those things and question those things and find out what's going on. What I've noticed is kiddos who are only children, the only one at home, perhaps the youngest child, who are isolated in their homes, who are very much so concerned about going outside of the house and have increased anxiety when they do go out, seem to really be having a tougher time right now. And that's not to say that anybody's grief or pain is worse than anyone else's, but it seems that there are some people who really are having a difficult time with bearing loneliness and being isolated. And even if, kids have siblings, if they don't necessarily play together or talk to each other, or they're not real close, they still may feel some of the effects of that social isolation, okay? It's very important that we start to have conversations about how this stress is impacting the body, not only for our kids, but also for ourselves. We need to ask open-ended questions. So those are questions that are similar to, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Not, you're okay, right? Or you're good, we're good, right? Don't answer the question for them. Even younger kids, even if they need some time to really work through stating how they feel or answering your question, ask open-ended questions. Monitor what you see them doing. Has their appetite changed, or their eating habits changed? And again, let me go back to, like, if we parents are only feeding our kids chips and hot dogs, then of course their appetites and their eating behaviors will change. And so we have to do better. That's me included. But if their appetite has changed to such that they're not eating at all, or you feel that the things that they once really enjoyed has just drastically changed, then, that bears asking, how are you feeling? Do you just not like this particular food anymore, or is there something else going on? So just try to ask more open-ended questions. We need to be mindful of exercise and diet. I've heard some really creative ways that people have tried to make sure that they stay in shape, be it having stations in their home so that they can do different exercises in different rooms, different dietary challenges, none of which I can subscribe to because they're pretty strict. But I've heard of lots of ways that people are really trying to check exercise and diet and ensure that they're keeping up with as many of their health goals as possible. So that's good. We need to try to continue to build relationships and foster relationships. I know most of us are just sick and tired of Zoom. Hey, some days I'm sick and tired of Zoom. I can admit that. I don't know if anybody else is in that same space, but the reality is this is one of the safest ways and best ways that we can communicate and still forge relationships with our colleagues and with our friends and even with family members. And that's just as important for kiddos. If they can have space and time to still talk to family members, to still talk to friends and keep in contact with those that they have real good relationships at school. If there's a way to do that, we really need to, as adults, help them to continue to foster those relationships, okay? If you have individuals, be it adults or children who are taking medications, it's important that we continue to monitor those medications, that they're still taking those medications, that you ensure that your physicians are aware of where you stand with medications. We're now at the time where some of the psychiatrists are asking parents to ensure that they come in and have routine checks or that they're ready and prepared for the upcoming school year. And I believe that this time it's as important as ever, because there is, again, more pressure, there's more stress that the bodies are feeling of our children that, again, they sometimes haven't even been able to express. Check in frequently with your children. Check in frequently with each other, with your friends. We have a way in our culture of kind of keeping it moving. We just keep going. We do things and we think that it's part of the routine. We have our schedule and we pick up and we just continue to go. But the reality is that a lot of people are not doing as well with that as they once could or once were doing. And so we really do need to check in with each other and make sure that my colleague is doing okay. And if we can have those conversations that really help us get back into perceptions and talking about how our bodies have been affected by these traumas that we've seen, then that's even better, because then we can grow in these relationships and have deeper conversations. But we really need to be checking in with each other and making sure that we're doing okay. Okay, for the sake of time, I just want to check in, Ms. McWoods. Just want to check in with you. I see that there's 20 minutes,
Yeah,
maybe 30 left.
Well, I know there's one
some questions.
Yeah, let me use this question now, and then you can continue on, and there may be some other questions. This one, I won't read who it's from, but I know it's a teacher, it's a middle school teacher that asked, during online learning, my partner teacher and I tried to check in with our homeroom group about how they were doing emotionally with shutdowns. There were usually only 5 to 7 kids, but are these conversations more productive one-on-one, or is a small group or a good way to go for peer support?
Okay, so let me try to make sure I understand the question. Was the question about asking a group of youth about how they're doing, or?
Yeah, these are middle school students from a middle school teacher, and he is asking, says there are usually 5 to 7 kids, but are these conversations more productive one-on-one or in a small group, or is there a good way to go for peer support?
Sure. Well, asking small groups is fine. I think, it's actually asking small groups sometimes gives you an open door for checking in with kiddos in particular who kind of bubble up, if you will. Sometimes kids feel a lot more confident and safe in a group than they will one-on-one. Not only that, again, because sometimes they can't really express how they feel or they've not really explored it. Hearing one kid or one child start to talk about how they feel may encourage and empower another to start to talk about how they feel and how they're coping with things. So definitely you can start with the group. That's a great idea, and check in and see if there are any that you might need to follow up with one-on-one.
Great. I have some more, and I know you have some more information. Shonda, did you want to stop now and have a couple questions you wanted to ask before she proceeded on?
Yes, I'll ask a question. So for children and adolescents that are dealing with mental health needs, the closure means that they have a lack of access to resources that they are usually provided through our schools. Mm-hmm. For example, Kirkwood School District has professional school counselors, embedded educational support counselors, which are like therapists, and social workers who support our students daily, in addition to external services that we might refer families out to. So I guess the question is, since many of our students are unable to access mental health supports through school and those peer groups through face-to-face services, what recommendations do you have to continue advocacy and support for our students in addition to telehealth services?
Sure. So the reality is that 80% of mental health is actually addressed outside of clinical settings. And so, yes, the school setting, in communities, if there are group organizations, even clubs, right? Those all actually afford kids an opportunity to really work through some of those mental health challenges that they have. So I think because we're in a new age and we're in a different time, outside of telehealth, we really, again, have to find ways to help them socialize more with peers. We have to find ways to help them reconnect with family members. If they do, in fact, have medicinal needs and they need treatment, we need to take that very seriously. I think sometimes parents can think because the kid is at home that those needs don't need to be addressed as much because they're not in a classroom per se or in the community per se, but those things are still very much so important. Now, I do know that there have been programs and therapists that have been trying to offer services at discounted rates and have been trying to find creative ways to help kids, be it through, again, some support groups online. And I know a lot of that telehealth is not ideal, but right now it really is one of the safest ways that we can help kids who are, in this pandemic age. And so I don't know that I can necessarily condone many things that are in the community. A lot of them are closed down. As much as we can keep them in activities, that's important. We really undervalue how much exercise and diet really do help with mental health. Exercise is one of the best ways to address anxiety and depression. Meditation is a great way to address anxiety. So there are lots of things that we can do that really aren't even clinical, that don't even necessarily require telehealth or a mental health counselor, even at the school, that if we can get parents on board with those things, if we can encourage those things even more, that might be one of the best ways that we can help our youth right now if we're not looking for telehealth services.
That's great. I want to ask another question. This has to do with mental health, particularly with in the African American community. I know you mentioned something earlier where you said that when you check in, you're saying you're good, right? Instead of asking them what's going on. That sometimes is a stigma in the African American community in terms of the overall mental health. We don't always readily think that the teens are the ones committing suicide. Those kinds of things are kind of pushed over in the African community. Why is that stigma there?
Well, the stigma that comes along with anything related to medicine, if we go back and we look at historical trauma and how our bodies, Black bodies, have been treated by doctors, okay, in terms of experimentations, in terms of, moms who were experimented on over and over and over again for the sake of science finding new tools to deliver babies. If we look at our history in this country, even here in St. Louis, the segregation of hospitals and not being able to go to certain, hospitals for service, and Black doctors even not being given the same notoriety as a white doctor. Right. I mean, we've been taught that we cannot trust the medical field, period.
Right.
And so that's why we have some of our older generations who refuse to go to the doctor, who think that they don't need to go get regular checkups because, again, it's in our bodies, though. It's not even just the narrative that's been passed down through generations. Some of it is we are keenly aware of how people see us and how people have felt about us through time. And we feel the same. We in turn are afraid. We are in turn nervous and concerned and protective of ourselves. So that stigma, it's very real. It is what we have been taught. It's what we have experienced. And, even now, there are lots of stories. Just a few days ago, I was talking to someone about how sometimes a woman can go and speak to a physician about birth control. And it is sort of like pushed off as it's a light hormone. It's not a big deal. And it is a big deal, because for many women who have been on any kind of birth control, albeit certain kinds of birth control, your body has changed. Your body has responded in adverse ways. And I'm not saying anything against birth control. Let me make sure I say that. But the things that our bodies experience and what we've gone through in terms of a culture of people, it says we need to be cautious.
Right.
So I think it's more than a stigma. I think some of it is what we've been taught, what we've seen.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Shonda, did you have some questions that you wanted to? Yeah. There you go.
This one right here was actually texted to me by an administrator. And then I have some questions from the parent lens, but I'm going to ask the administrator question first. So how can we frame discussions with families about students that we see they're dealing with chronic stress, especially when acknowledging mental health is often not a favorable thing? And so how do you navigate? And I've been in situations, certainly I can relate to this at the level. How do you navigate those discussions with families when they seem to not be able to see that the student is dealing with chronic stress, and you're trying to make sure that you get some advocacy for them through the parents?
Mm-hmm. This one hits home for me. And I will say, from a professional lens as well as a personal lens, it really starts with trust.
Right.
I can't do anything in terms of therapy with someone who does not feel safe. And unfortunately, I think there has been so many barriers that have been created between educators and parents unintentionally, particularly with Black boys, that oftentimes there's a lack of trust. And that makes it difficult for when educators are very concerned and really want to help a parent and really want to help a family. It makes it very difficult, I think, for those parents to be receptive. So I would say start with trust. Like, the first phone call shouldn't be about, I think your kid has ADHD. The first phone call shouldn't be about, your kid seems highly anxious. What else do you see? What else is happening? What strengths does that child possess? What potential do you see there? It really does start with that conversation. It's the same with therapy. We start with strengths. We start with questions. What do you think about this process? How can I support you as a parent? How can I support you as a family member? And then we can dive into the hard stuff. And I know that as educators, the time doesn't always allow opportunity to really build that trust, but that's really the core of any healthy relationship. You have to start with finding ways to build trust with those parents.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, and then I'll let Roberta chime in. I feel like I'm kind of hogging all of your time.
No, you're good.
Well, to kind of pivot from a parent lens. And so oftentimes I've had conversations with parents about how do you start these conversations at home. And so if you believe that your child is dealing with generational trauma or has experienced racism or just actually witnessing racism towards others or chronic stress, like how do you envision that a parent might start these conversations at home with their children around these topics?
Well, my hope is that we're having conversations before there is an encounter. My hope is that we are having conversations with our kids, and I will say age appropriate conversations. How about that? With our kids way before there's an encounter, so that it's it's on their radar. And I think now in the media, there's been more of a spotlight on how Black parents have to talk to their children, as opposed to how some of other cultures may need to prepare their kids for the world, right? But we really should be talking to our kids at a very young age about race and about culture and about who we are as a society and fairness and equity and what's okay and what's not okay. And we should make assumptions that the schools will teach them about civil rights, and the schools will teach them everything that they need to know. It's our responsibility as parents to start having those conversations with our kids so that they understand and are able to then come back and ask us questions when things are tough, right? Mom, I heard this word today, and I feel about this word because I hear my Black friends say it all the time, and I hear it on the radio, but when this other kid said it, it's offensive. I mean, that's a conversation for a family to have, because if you're listening to it on the radio and you hear those words and your kids it's inevitable that at some point in time it comes up. The conversations come up. What does that word mean? Is it okay for some people to use and other people not to, right? So we really need to be having conversations with our kids, age appropriate conversations with our kids, before we get to those times where then there's a major incident. And when there is a major incident, such as what's happening in our society right now, and this is nothing new, let's just say that, but when it is shown in a different level, right? We need to, again, talk about how are you feeling about what you're seeing? What have you heard? What images have you seen? What do you think about it? How do you feel about it? Again, open-ended questions. And it's interesting the way that kids often respond. And so we have to meet them where they are, because sometimes kids are a lot more aware than what we realize.
Yeah, I agree. I think that answer I think it certainly will help a lot of people that I've been having conversations with, because so many individuals feel like they have to be experts on the topic to be able to navigate the conversation. And I often, with my son, with me talking to my son, I don't know that I'm an expert on anything. So I would never bring up and have conversations with him about anything. A lot of what we talk about is me listening to and understanding his thoughts and his experiences and kind of talking through those things. And so every parent is equipped to be able to do that. And so I'm really, I really appreciate your answer, because I think it empowers parents to just start the conversation, and it will naturally flow in a way that makes sense, and you can always revisit it. So I think that's great. One more question, then I'm going to pivot to Roberta. Thank you, Roberta.
No problem.
Okay, so thinking about parents and those conversations, we have a lot of students who have also dealt with a high level of stress. And so you talked about seasonal depression. And so we're pivoting into that month where, those times when, depression and stress might be elevated, and kids are already experiencing a high level of stress just because, after spring break, they didn't return. And so that normalcy of being in school and some of those experiences that I think sometimes we take for granted now when it's no longer hard for a lot of our kids to kind of, work with being in a virtual online setting. And so for parents, how do they discern when their child is actually just dealing with normal stress, anxiety, just an outcome of the changing environment with COVID-19, how that is impacting their family with all of the racial and social issues that we see that are playing out in our community and throughout the world, and whether they really need to kind of reach out and to check into other to see if there's something larger, and maybe an anxiety disorder, or they need some additional support in relation to their child.
So I think that's, it's kind of a twofold question. So first, I think that parents need to make sure that we are checking ourselves, and that we know how things are affecting us as best as we can figure it out and as best as we can understand ourselves. We need to know if, or even observe how we behave when we have to get, our kids have to get online. You know, I know some parents are just like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so that in and of itself may create more anxiety for our child, who is also like, I don't know what I'm doing either. And so we need to check our responses and how we are really showing our kids how to respond to what's happening in the world, and what we're saying and what we're doing. You know, if you're talking to the television all day, every day, and you're mad about what you see on the television, or it's causing you to feel anxious, or you're, you know, speaking of being fearful or afraid, then, you know, some of those things our kids are observing, and they may also begin to feel similar emotions, similar feelings. I think that if you notice that your child is struggling and they appear to be having a hard time, and again, behaviors have started to change, then try to implement some things first. You know, again, number one, have some conversation with them to see if they can acknowledge and disclose how it is that they're feeling, how they're coping, how they're dealing with things. And, you know, if you notice that your routine has in fact changed, where your diet is different and you guys haven't gotten outside, you haven't been able to socialize with family or friends, then try to implement some of those things that we mentioned earlier that really are effective and important in terms of keeping connections and in terms of maintaining a reasonable amount of routine and healthy behavior. Start there. And if you start to do some of those things and you just sort of notice that those things aren't working, right? If your kiddo is not sleeping and yet your routine is completely off, and maybe they're sleeping in the day and really you just need to focus on helping them sleep at night, that might be helpful. But if you notice that even as you try to implement some of those different things to make sure that they have a healthy routine and healthy behaviors, then maybe it's time to reach out to someone to say, you know, I've tried a few different things and these things don't seem to be helping us. We're trying to cope as best as we can, but we in fact need additional support.
Great. Those are good responses. I appreciate that. I have a couple questions here. I'm going to try to paraphrase this one a little bit. I'll read it to how it's written, but I think I can paraphrase it. How will the curriculum change to allow students to find pride in themselves? We were taught that slaves were not smart people. How will students study enough to find what systemic racism has done to hold students back in schools? So I'm assuming she's asking, how can curriculum change? Or if since curriculum is already kind of stagnant right now, and those images are already in the textbooks, where they're kind of giving these negative images about slavery, what can the student do? And I'm seeing this as a partnership between the student, the parent, and it should be the responsibility of the teacher as well, to help them with the systemic racism that they see that's going on in the textbooks. Does that make sense?
I think I get the question. And let me say, you know, I'm a therapist, so I'm not sure about how the curriculum will change.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to give our kids curriculum about who they are.
Yeah.
We need to show them, we need to talk to them, we need to find the books that they may not get in the classroom, so that they have a greater understanding of who they are. And again, it's not on any one person. It's not on just the teachers. It's not on, you know, the curriculum instructor for the district. We would love for everybody to be on the same page to help all kids feel confident and love the skin that they're in. But unfortunately, that we're not there yet. And in order to get there, parents need to be strong advocates for what they do see in the classroom. If they have books that they can recommend to the library at the school, if they have opportunities to come in and read to kids, bring a book that's from an author that they may not have been exposed to, or tell them about other resources. Tell the teachers. Sometimes the teachers just don't know. It's not a matter of them, you know, being selective necessarily. Sometimes they just don't know.
Right.
Like all of us, right? We're all trying to figure out how to be the best we can for our kids, for the next generations to come. So I would just say it starts with the parents. We have to take some ownership in how our kids see themselves and what we're telling them about who they are and their heritage and history. And then as best as we can, if you're a part of a Girl Scout troop, again, I don't know what that's going to look like this year, but if you can give a history lesson, if you can, show them ways to be prideful in the tapestry of American culture, if you can find different ways to do that, again, donating books to the library, there's lots of ways that we can impact what's happening in the schools. But yes, I think the curriculum, it's, as a therapist, I'm not quite sure how it changes, but I definitely think that parents need to be advocates for change.
Right. Last week we had speakers that were on talking about monuments, very much into the history. And, I think that's a challenge for any teachers, particularly social studies teachers, but any teachers that are teaching from textbooks that are dated and don't have the right information in there. And yeah, again, that goes hand in hand into them doing the work themselves to try to help their students get the truth. I have a comment from another person that just, you named a book. It says, can you give the name again of the person who wrote My Grandmother's Hands?
Sure. His name is Resmaa, Resmaa Menken, Menaken. I had to make sure I wrote out, because every time I've said it, I've left off an A. So I wrote it out so that I would remember to say it to give you the correct spelling of his name.
Okay, say that one more time.
Okay, Resmaa Menken, Resmaa Menaken.
Got it. Great, thank you. So I know you might have more information that you want to impart, and I'm going to pause here and see if there's anything else you wanted to share with us. And then I know there's some more questions that are being asked. So if you want to just continue with the Q&A, that's fine too.
We can continue with Q&A. Some of what I still had on my notes to share have kind of come out in questions, so that's okay. So if there are more questions, I'm willing to take some more questions.
Okay, I do have one. You mentioned the weather, the season. Mm-hmm. How does that affect? I know when it's wintertime, it's cold, you're inside and you have the blues. But how does that manifest itself in terms of just your overall mental health with children and with adults? Are they the same in terms of the mood and how we react to things on top of everything else that's going on? Because we know right now COVID is happening. All of those things happen from spring to summer. Mm-hmm. If we are to go into fall and winter with this, how does all of those things affect our mental health?
Yeah, so even without COVID and without what we're seeing in the news, typically, as Dr. Ambrose Phillips mentioned, there's seasonal affective disorder where people really do feel the effect of winter. We're not getting as much sun. We're sleeping more. We're not outside. We're not exercising as much. And the other piece of that is we're not really socializing in the same way. In the summer and the spring, we're out at the park. We're out with friends. We're bicycling. We're, having, barbecues and people over and all of that jazz. But in the winter, like, nobody wants to be outside. Typically, we're bundled up and trying to just stay warm. And so aside from the holidays, we also don't have the same socialization during the winter months. And so the concern is, if we don't find some ways, and I'm saying this is a concern of mine, I actually was talking to a pediatrician on Saturday who mentioned that the rise in anxiety has definitely gone up, and medications have gone up in her practice in particular. And I kind of came back with that and said, well, I'm really concerned when it gets cold out too, because already we're starting to see an increase in terms of depression, anxiety, and suicide, and even suicide ideality. And so I'm concerned that when we get to those colder months, that those are going to be even more concerning, if we don't have ways to cope with them now.
Right.
So we really need to find some ways to do that now. We've got to find some ways to make sure that our kids are connected, make sure that we're connected, that we're checking in on ourselves, that we can have these conversations with our kids, and that we're brave enough to talk to them about like scary things. You know, it can be a little bit rattling for parents sometimes to talk about things that upset us, right? But we have to be a little brave about that so that we can really help ourselves and help them before we get to those colder winter months.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Piggyback off of that. So yes, and I think definitely in going into the spring, we know suicide rates are higher in the spring, and that's something we really try to make sure that we keep on here in the district. But many of our families are, again, telling us that they're overwhelmed with virtual education. Some of our families are working from home. Some of them have actually been laid off because of COVID. And so that's stressful, dealing with unemployment and all of the factors that contribute to it. And they're just juggling a lot at home with multiple schedules. If you have kids in different levels, then you're being contacted by 3 different principals, 3 different, buildings, particularly maybe teachers in every building. And so it's really overwhelming for parents who are dealing with a lot. And so thinking about our students and also our parents, how can we manage our own self-care? And just, we know that stress and anxiety is universal. So how can families model ways? I feel like you did a really great job of talking about how we can kind of encourage these activities in students, but how can parents also manage their own stress and anxiety that they're most likely dealing with during this time?
Yeah. So let me say too about just being online like all day, right? There has to be a time in which we unplug. We've got to unplug. Can, put the phones down. No more Zoom calls after whatever time. 7, 8, yeah. I don't know. But it's not like, you have a kiddo who's on technology all day. Like as a parent, typically we're like, okay, you've had way too much tech. It's time to get off. Well, the same is true for us. Sometimes we really do need to just unplug. We have to get back to just being in front of people face to face. If you notice that things like taking a hot shower, taking a hot bath, help you to de-stress, do that. Do that as often as you need to. Like everything doesn't necessarily have to be outside of your home or cost money. If you find that, playing a card game, Uno is a favorite in my house, even though it gets competitive. Believe it or not, Uno can be real competitive in the Knight family. But, things like that. If you can find ways to just get away from the cage with each other and have fun. One of the things that I think is challenging too, because one of the things that we've also noticed really since COVID hit is that the number of domestic violence cases has arisen, right? So really having a hard time adjusting and with their frustrations, and sometimes you're getting those behaviors that you could avoid essentially weren't at home. And so I want to make sure that I sort of as well, that if your home is safe and you can find ways to engage with family members in a better way, you can do things in the home that are fun and unplug, do that. But there's another piece there too, that if you are in a home that's not safe, it's even more so important to be connected to other people, because for some of our kids, the reality is they may need another home, a friend or somebody that they're connected to go get a meal. They may need somebody else around to talk to. Things are testy at home. Those relationships are just key. And I can't express that enough. I think the social isolation is the part of being on tech all day. That's really hard for a lot of people who are, especially extroverts. The introverts don't care so much. But keeping those connections is what's really important for us right now, as best as we can. Even if it's a distance sort of situation where we're talking, just walking dogs or something of that nature, we need to try to stay connected to the people that we love. So for adults, if you like to read, if you like the coloring books, the adult coloring books, if baths and showers make you feel good, if you're journaling, if you have a book that you've been saying you're going to write forever, start the book. If you feel good by doing some sort of meditative practice, if you like writing affirmations, if they inspire you and give you hope, write aspirations or write those things down every day. And 3 minutes a day, do something that brings you joy. A lot of times we're better able to find those things that bring us joy than sometimes our kids can. Our kids tend to go, I'm bored, right? But a lot of times for us, we know those things that really do make us happy, But we need to try to unplug as much as we can and really center ourselves.
Okay.
Wow. So it's right around 2, and I know you could probably go on, and I want to thank everyone for getting on. For somehow or another, I misplaced my statement, my Kirkwood educational speaker statement, and I'm just going to kind of briefly read through that. So those of you that have been on every week and coming on every week, we'll have you make some closing remarks, Jeanna, and I think Shonda is going to talk about next week's speakers. But we've been doing this for 3 weeks now. We actually started last winter, doing it once a month, but we're doing a 7-week speaker series. And the purpose of this speaker series is to provide a safe space for Kirkwood School District staff, students, community, and the community outside of Kirkwood to have courageous conversations around systemic racism that affects Black, Indigenous, and students of color, with the objectives of increasing equity for Black and Brown students and closing the opportunity gap. It is our hope that participants become enlightened, inspired, and more self-aware as they work to improve the lives of all students through the enhancement of social, emotional, economic, civic, and educational outcomes. That is what I was trying to read before I did the introduction, and somehow or another it got misplaced. But Jeanna, if someone wanted to get in contact with you, could you leave a contact information for them if they wanted to do that, and then I'll turn it over to Shonda. And thank you again. You are absolutely amazing. We appreciate it.
I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to talk to so many people at once. I got nervous when you said Facebook Live, but it's okay. And but I just really appreciate the opportunity to help. So for those of you, if you'd like to reach out to me, if you need referrals for therapists in the community, even if you have some other things that you would just like to, bring up and discuss, I can be reached by phone at 314-943-2399. You can reach me via email at Jeanna, Jeanna, at libertycounselingstl.com. That's also my website, libertycounselingstl.com. You can check out my website. There's information there as well about services that we offer. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're awesome. Thank you so much. And if you missed those, you can always find on Facebook or go to the district website or contact myself, Roberta McWoods, or Shonda, anyone at the central office if you needed to get those contacts again. Thanks again. Shonda, tell us what's going on for next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday on July 28th, our speaker series will continue. The topic is leading equity from where we are. So how our stage of racial identity development matters. Our 3 panelists will be Pamela Denise Long, who's a Master in Science, and she represents Alive and Well Communities. We'll also have Joy Wiesmo. She's with We Can St. Louis, which is West County Action Network. And then also DeWitt Campbell III, who has an MSW, and he is with NCCJ St. Louis. And so there will also be a document that we'll be sending out with the communication that I would love for you to kind of look at in advance. I think it will really help you facilitate the discussion that we're having to be able to understand the context from which it's coming from. So we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. And anyone from the Kirkwood School District, please email your name to Lorna Dick, and she will make sure you get credit for today and any other sessions that you do. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you again, Jeanna. You're wonderful, and we'll talk again soon. See you next week. Thank you.